Hey, Sig, how's it going?
Going good. I got my hair all tousled from the wind out there. So
Fun, fun. All right. So, I don't know. Do you just want to pick up exactly where we left off? We can maybe slow down the pace a little bit. I know we're getting pretty heated at the end there, but
well, I go fast when I'm excited, right?
Yeah, no, me too.
It gets nice and chewy, and then I start to speed up, and I actually watch a lot of the debates kind of on like 1 1/3. Oh, it's too slow.
Yeah,
so,
I hear you.
Either which way, I'm a little more mellow because it's a little later in the day and been out in the sun.
But at the same time, we're just getting into the really big parts of this argument, and we've only got 45 minutes. So,
sure, we were chewing on deterministic universes and how that impacts the idea of subjective morals. And I was saying that even if we are essentially sort of biorobots of a sort, we're still individuals, and my definition of subjective is still based on that, and we differentiate between us, and that our morality is not causal. It is nonetheless part of our.
And I went back and I chewed on some of your arguments a little bit more, and I see where you stumped me with like the island thought experiment. I'll admit you did stump me, and it took me a minute to figure out why, because you took a really hardline solipsist stance on that, and from the position that no objective statement can be made from a subjective viewpoint. Yeah, absolutely. You can just withdraw from that. Fair. So I guess it doesn't apply to you. And the question does become if objective morality exists. And what we were chewing on at the end there is, sorry, I meant to say if an objective observer standpoint, if you will, exists that exerts more of what you were talking about the determining force of what rules out. So if there's a supreme being, that would be the objective morality.
Right. I never say that objective morality is conceptually impossible, philosophically speaking. It could exist if there is a omnipotent creator God. I'm just saying that I do say that even if there is, we poor humans are kind of stuck fighting in the mud anyway. So the difference is relatively meaningless for practice.
Understood.
Matters.
And kind of from your position, you seem to even be asserting that, if you want to twist the words around a little bit, since God would be his own observer, even that is subjective, right? Yeah, but...
Yeah, we could rebel against God with our morality,
but we'd
I guess.
Be wrong in that case. Yeah, so that would...
Or at least we would lose. Let's put it that way.
Subjective... nature of morality wouldn't really apply, even if you could technically throw it into a wordplay thing there. But yeah, let's get a little bit back on track, because we were talking about the implications of determinism, and I really wanted to chew on that, because what you seemed to be saying was that complexity and the introduction of what we can call social interactions is what allows you to define our deterministic choices as moral, whereas the deterministic choices of rocks are not, because, well, they're not social, and they're not as complex as us in those social ways, right?
And they don't make choices either, really. I mean, a rock doesn't make a choice. It has no mechanism for
That's what I wanted to get into. That's what
I
wanted to get into. Okay, so a deterministic viewpoint is essentially, I don't think you can avoid this, correct me if I'm wrong, also a reductionist viewpoint. I mean, things can be reduced to the sums of their parts, and any human definitions that we give to things, definitions in our mind, are merely descriptors for different configurations of existing parts, right? So, they're symbolic.
Yeah, they're symbolic.
That's sort of the semiotics of it, so that's they just represent things. They're not actually
right.
You're not an essentialist if you're a naturalist. You're a reductionist. So let me say. Let me intrude just one point before we go too far. When it comes to classic philosophy, I'm a little bit of a junior Boy Scout. I don't do a lot of reading in that area. Most of what I know is from encountering people that I talk to. And so my impression of what one philosophical view or another is either what I read on Wikipedia or what I picked up, from other people. I tend to find a certain level of philosophy a bit, I don't know, was it navel gazing or sort of talking in circles? I don't know if tedious is the right word, but sort of
lacks substance and meaning sometimes. Too much semantics. Not that I don't like philosophy at all. I have a limited patience for reading it. And so when I talk to people often, if I'll say something like, when I told you I'm an Epicurean, that's a pretty vague, I've read some stuff in the Epicurean field, and it describes my viewpoint reasonably well. But my viewpoint is Sig's philosophy,
Siegfried,
whatever that is. So just so you know. Yeah, so if I say a philosophical word, don't read too much into it.
Nevertheless, being an atheist, you do agree that the natural universe is all that can be said to meaningfully exist, right? Okay.
I think that is likely,
and as you said, you're a determinist, so you don't believe in metaphysical, spiritual influence changing the course of reality as a definition of free will. You think that free will is something that arises out of natural, although complex and individualistic circumstances, right?
Yeah. And again, it's mostly a matter of, I'm not saying anything else is possible.
And what we're trying to
don't see it.
If one view is true, then what are the implications for morality, right? That's what we're debating here. Okay. Yeah. And as am I. But I have a pretty solid understanding of the viewpoint you've put across, I think, and I think I have a pretty good rebuttal for the points that you were making at the end of our previous debate. So
okay, cool.
If you are a naturalist, you are essentially a reductionist, because everything is kind of reducible to the sum of its parts, and any descriptors that we give to things are symbolic for what we assess to be configurations of these parts. Okay, so a human is a particular configuration of organs, which is a particular configuration of cells that are a particular configuration of proteins, which are a particular configuration of biomolecules, et cetera, all the way down to the point where we are all a particular configuration of particles. Okay, particles and information.
Or information, yeah.
So everything in existence in the naturalistic worldview, especially in the deterministic worldview, is reducible to a particular configuration of particles and information. Now, my question to you is, because you were very quick to dismiss that I went straight to rocks, and I skipped all of the much more comparable things, such as chimpanzees that at least have some kind of social interaction, right? So my question to you is, in that view, where do you draw the line between what can be interpreted as meaningless or essentially meaningless interactions between particles and a social dynamic? Like, what makes the social interactions that we have as humans, and don't say complexity, because complexity is pretty meaningless in a worldview like this. I mean, a rock is pretty complex with the way the atoms are moving around in it, but at different scales, that doesn't matter at all. So what makes the social interactions that humans have any different than the movement of rocks on the bottom of the ocean? I want to know where you draw that line if you claim that it is so distinct. Because if everything is deterministic, and all deterministic actions are the interactions of particles, there's no significance there one way or the other. And so I don't think that...
No significance.
I just really don't think that morality is an applicable term to something that's going to happen no matter what, and that can only be distinguished by levels of complexity and arbitrary labels that we put on seemingly different interactions. So that is why I contend that there's no way to apply the term morality to that. Sorry, I'll let you have the mic.
Okay. It's a good question. It's a good challenge. And my answer is not going to be as shiny and clear as many of them often are, because we're talking a lot, the way we're kind of conflating things. So human beings have a perspective and an understanding because of who we are and how we work. We've got eyes and nose and teeth and mouths, and we interact with people in a certain way. We have a certain kind of a viewpoint. We don't really... to use a science fiction term, grok what it means to be a rock or a river or a cheetah or anything else. We're human beings. We're a little bit limited in our conception and understanding. We can imagine, but we can't exactly know. And so what's significant to us might not be significant, say, to an alien from Zanzibar, a dog, or a god, right? So morals matter to us because they impact our lives. They're part of our survival mechanism because we are an inherently social species. We survive by cooperation with one another. Morals are an essential part of our life in order to ensure that kind of cooperation and that kind of cooperation. So it means a lot to us. It wouldn't mean a lot to other organisms or to rocks or to trees or whatever. So the meaning of morality, why it's specific to us and not just a bunch of molecules, is because it impacts our lives and the things that we naturally care about. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm in an airstream here. The airstream is a bunch of molecules. How, if the airstream is sitting out in a rocky field somewhere and there's no people around, yeah, it doesn't have any meaning. It's just another big lumpy thing there that the wind has to go around. And the wind doesn't care if it goes around a rock or it goes around an airstream or goes around whatever. Obviously, the different shape is going to make things happen differently, but there's no, there's not an awareness going on, right? Because there's not a mind.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah. Human beings and other animals too have an awareness, and plants have awareness. And that makes things meaningful to us and causes us to make decisions or to react to these things in certain ways. So the airstream, if you're a person, well, that's my home. And so it has meaning to me that doesn't have to you, so on and so forth, right? The configuration matters, I guess is the thing. So like a pile of Legos, is that an airplane? Well, it could be an airplane. You can make it into an airplane. You could reconfigure it, and then it has new function and features and properties. Take it apart. You can build it into a car now, and it has different functions and pieces and properties. But it's the same pile of Legos. Arrangement has meaning. Meaning has significance to human beings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I wonder how you account for it. How
do I account for it? In what sense? I guess it's circumstances. We happen to be the kinds of creatures that find morality meaningful. So I mean, non-social animals don't find morality meaningful because it doesn't impact their life.
Striking to me, and that awareness is what determines it. Awareness is what allows something to have meaning. Well, oh boy, if we were ever about to get metaphysical. So I mean, you strike me as the type of person that would say if we could make a computer that had sufficiently complex thought and that could sufficiently self-reference its own programming, that it would be aware in the exact same way that a human person would, and that it would have its own behind-the-eyes observer standpoint, that sort of that thing that I always find it really striking there's not a word for. Like you could say the word is qualia, but even that doesn't fully describe it, because if you look up the term qualia, it refers to like.
I had somebody quote that to me. I had to go look it up because I hadn't heard it before.
Yeah, even qualia doesn't actually grasp the concept of it. I think it's the one thing that everybody knows exists that there is no word for. That's striking to me. We can't put a word for it, because any word that you can make for it, I guess you could say the mind as separate from the brain, the singularity that is you, the you behind the eyes. And you know what I'm talking about. I don't really need to get too descriptive with it. The consciousness.
There's a lot of words that people use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess the question is, do you believe that a sufficiently complex robot would have one of those just because it referenced its own thoughts? I mean, are you familiar with the Chinese room paradox? Like,
yeah,
you can make something that is very complex and that has all the interactions that kind of work in the same way as a brain, but I don't believe that is equatable to the subjective experience. I don't to the qualia kind of thing that we're talking about. I don't personally believe that is equal to that. And
I think we'll find out.
How would we find out? Because, I mean, here's my question. How would you find out? Because I can't even be sure that you have that, right? I mean, that's the solipsist standpoint,
sure.
Which kind of comes back to the, island thought experiment. Like, the only way that you avoided the pitfall of utilitarianism that, a utilitarian moral worldview would fall into in that is that they couldn't say it was objectively wrong. utilitarian morals actually try to be objective. They try to say the best action is what brings about the most happiness for the highest number, right? And a utilitarian standpoint can't say that that's wrong, but that causes cognitive dissonance because it is almost universally accepted that killing someone who is innocent for selfish reasons, which is the scenario I was laying out there, killing someone who's technically innocent for selfish reasons, it's wrong. That's just wrong, right? And utilitarian morals try to place that as being wrong too, but they can't account for that. And so the failure to account for that obviously wrong scenario is what I think demonstrates the failure of that moral worldview. And the only way you avoided that pitfall is to say that objective statements are impossible to make because all statements come from one subjective mind to another. Okay, and I want to get into a little bit of why I don't think that carries weight when talking about the objectivity or subjectivity of a real thing like morality. Like, I can tell you that 2 + 2 is 4, but I'm one subjective mind speaking to another. And so you can call that a subjective statement too. It might be referring to something that is objectively true, but the only way you call it objectively true is that in your own subjective experience, everyone around you agrees, and it makes sense to your understanding. So I just find it a little bit like, yeah, okay, that the only escape you can make from the obvious moral pitfall of that thought experiment is to completely turtle up in a solipsist position, which solipsism is, it's known and resented as being the most absurd, but the only completely irrefutable philosophy. Like, all that you can know to exist is your own mind. Any statement you can make is going to come from your own mind. Okay, so that's the solipsist position. And you take a solipsist position on morality, and that's the only way that you can avoid saying an objective statement about something obviously wrong. So that's what's striking to me. And I just want to know how you reconcile that without saying, well, I don't care.
Right, because there's a certain amount of truth to I don't care. Because when I live my day-to-day life, I don't check my philosophical thesaurus and try to figure out which ontological framework I'm making my decision under. I know what I feel, and I follow my heart and wisdom and the experiences that I've had. So I do it on a very kind of macro level, which I think is a very human way to do it. What we're doing is trying to deconstruct thoughts, which is very hard and not very natural, really.
When you make a sweeping statement about morality, you invite that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, well, I like to do it, so, that's all good. But there was a lot of things there. So let me talk a little bit about awareness and the mind and that sort of thing. I would say that you could make a robot eventually that will, replicate a human. And as we were driving around today, I was like, how long do I think that'll take? I'm not sure. That's always a little bit tricky, but I would say within 100 years, you'll definitely see robots that you could not distinguish from a person because they're, depending on the range of what they're doing, because the facility, the variability of their programming is so good that we would have a hard time detecting.
And just to clarify, you don't think that would be a philosophical zombie?
No, I don't think so. I think that would be a life form. I think it would be a person, not a soulless thing. Because I have to be honest, intellectually honest and say that's what we are. We are machines. We're machines made of flesh and bone and blood and air and all kinds of other things. We have a function, which is to survive. The programming is whatever works for survival will propagate, and whatever fails will die. The universe that gives rise to our nature through interaction of the laws of the universe. We are, as I said, I'm generally a determinist. We are a natural outcome of this natural universe. And we express the logic and the truth of the universe in our ideas, not the entirety of it, but at least part of it, in who we are and what we do. And I think that there's nothing magical about that. And that with sufficient time, knowledge, and experimentation, we can make something equal to or greater than ourselves. And in some ways, we already have in very narrow fields. There's no computer that has the wide-ranging power of the human mind by any stretch, but there are lots of computers that could outthink us in very specific lines of activity. They used to say, computer could never beat a Go master. Well, computers beat Go masters all the time now. They used to say, computers can never do X, Y, or Z. They can't read. They can't think. They can't. And, well, every day, more of those kinds of things fall by the wayside because we put our effort into trying to understand how our own minds work. and our own logic, and then building machines that can do those things that we want to do, just like we might build a mechanical arm to do something. It's a whole lot simpler, but working at it, and we seem to be having a lot of success in these regards. You were saying, I was saying that there is a test, I think, that someday will come up. Not sure we're there yet, but when we get molecular printers, like Star Trek time, right? So if we can arrange individual molecules any way we want, and if we can read individual molecules effectively, we could scan a human brain, print a human brain, and see what it says, essentially. Eventually, we should be able to do that. And if that has the same mind of the person whose brain you scanned, well, now you know that that's not a zombie. We are machines in that sense, that our spirit is a function of our physicality.
I don't think that necessarily would demonstrate that.
I think it would come close. I mean, but what test could you use to disprove it?
I don't think you could use a test to prove or disprove it either way. And I come back to the Chinese room paradox. Like, you can have someone that is inputting Chinese, and someone in the room has a perfect instruction booklet of like, okay, if you get this input, then this is how you translate it. Or this is how you translate it to English. He has an instruction book. The guy doesn't know Chinese. The guy's not actually experiencing the understanding of Chinese. It's not going through his head. Okay, he's reading input, he's putting in parameters, and output is coming on the other side. So I don't think that if you could create a robot that is, essentially molecularly identical to a human mind, and it acts relatively like a human, I don't think that proves that there is the subjective, what I think is a dualistic non-physical element of your own personal mind. I don't think that means the lights are on upstairs. I don't think that can necessarily prove that at all. That's what the concept of a philosophical zombie is. Now, I personally believe that the absence of that would affect its behavior. I think it would act rather sociopathic, because I believe that sociopaths have some sort of disconnect in their head that doesn't really allow them to perceive their own. Like, it's really weird stuff when you get into it. Like, there was a guy who had a lobotomy, and it was enigmatic hearing him describe what his subjective experience was like. Like, he was talking about how he missed being able to experience his own mind. It was really creepy. It was freaky. And I think that certain types of sociopathic people have a disconnect there where they might not be able to really experience their own mind in the same way that a normal person could. And I think that if you were to replicate a human brain, it would act that way. So maybe that test would sort of determine it on a behavioral standpoint, but I mean, then you could chalk that up to anything,
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I don't particularly adhere to dualism is because studies of brains and people, who have had their corpus callosum cut, people who've had brain injuries, they can dramatically change their personality, their moral views, their emotional state, their sense of self. You can destroy somebody's ability to create memories, and they lose entirely their sense of identity as any of us would understand it. And these are all due to, it's not like their spirit got hurt, right?
Right.
That should be impossible. It's because their brain was damaged. And if you can damage the brain and affect all of these behaviors, all of these essential ideas that make us who we are as human beings, then that tells me, just in a very that the brain is what makes those things and it gives rise to them and creates them. And the fact that, we die when our brain dies tells me that is that is the source of our identity, of our personality, of our spirit, and all that.
Can I
see a lot of,
that really quick? Or do you have
go
more to
ahead.
say?
No, I was starting to ramble, so go for it.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think that the fact that you can drastically change someone's behavior, thoughts, morality, and things like that doesn't necessarily indicate that the brain is the source of the mind. I think the brain is the gateway to the mind. Okay, I think so. Like, take for instance, you have your computer, and maybe that's your brain. Okay, and then you sitting in the chair there, that's your mind. Or I'm sorry, the computer is the real world. You sitting in the chair, that's your mind. Your keyboard and your monitor are kind of your brain. They're the gateway. They're what propagates information between, in the dualist respect, this is kind of what I would believe, that You have an interface. Your brain is an interface between whatever is metaphysical and whatever is physical. So if you're playing an online game and your monitor starts breaking down and you can't see what's going on the screen, and your keyboard starts breaking down and your input gets screwed up, that would drastically affect everything about the way you behave in the game. So that doesn't necessarily demonstrate that your keyboard and monitor are the source of your mind. It would only, at the very least, demonstrate that it is a gateway to it.
I think that's a somewhat plausible explanation. There are challenges when people who have had some of these experiences maybe they're not the same person anymore. They've changed in a dramatic way, but they're still an entire functional human being. Their brain heals effectively. Well, yeah, but I mean, yes. I mean, you wouldn't know them from anybody else. You would meet them on the street. You could say, hi, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, you have a malfunctioning brain. It's destroyed your soul interface. Really? I mean, these are people that you could talk. You wouldn't know unless they told you that they had some traumatic changed, physically changed them and resulted in an emotional and spiritual change in their identity. You wouldn't know that because, it's impossible.
There's still functioning in their behavior.
And there's still real
schizophrenics might have something going on like that.
Right, but you can affect schizophrenia with chemicals. There are a number of people who are schizophrenic and they take medicine and it stops schizophrenia. It changes the activity of the brain.
Yeah.
It's not a soul pill, right? Yeah, I know, but I find that to be more of an excuse than a like, here, look, logic the way it should be. It's more sort of like, wait. I know the brain thing is kind of difficult for me. How about if I say, well, the brain is just a conduit, and
I don't really feel that it's an ad hoc retreat at all. I think that I actually.
But what evidence can you offer that it works that way?
What evidence can you offer that it doesn't? I mean, like that is something that we are really. Well,
people are still fully functional human beings.
I'm sorry, what was that? You broke up a little bit. You broke up a little bit there.
Brain damage and recover from it. Completely functional human beings are different human beings than they were before the damage.
I don't think that is evidence for your premise that the brain is the be-all, end-all of the mind. Like, I think...
it's an argument against the interface idea. If the interface was broken, you said, we would have all these difficulties being human beings, right? But they are not having any difficulties. It's more like they upgraded to Windows.
Okay, wait. I don't actually see that there. You're claiming that people with brain damage don't have difficulties. Like,
some of them don't. That's right. They recover.
Yeah,
but they are changed
difficulty
nonetheless.
Is subjective.
They're not the same
like,
people.
Okay, if you're playing a video game and say, I'll come back to this, and you're playing a first-person shooter, and your A key breaks, so you can't move left. Okay. So you're going to notice that when that person's playing in the game, they might get along just fine. They might be good enough at the game that they don't really need to move left. They'll strafe right. They'll, turn to the left and then move forward. So they can function just fine, but they're a little bit different. So somebody with brain damage.
What if your gun starts shooting flowers? Is that the interface? I mean, that's not your A key broken.
Well,
it's a pretty fundamental change in who you are.
Okay, if your gun starts shooting flowers, that would actually entail a change in the game mechanics itself, not your behavior with what you have, your character, which is what people with brain damage.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the sort of thing that happens.
Okay, but I'm just saying that that's not an argument saying that the interface idea is false. We can't know one way or the other. Both of our ideas are just as plausible.
No, here's the thing. If it was just an interface, if an interface change, we would expect that when that is fixed, the original expression of your soul would come through just as it was before, unaltered.
No.
But that's not what we see.
No.
After the damage, we see a change in the expression of what your soul really is.
No.
Unless you're saying these people are walking around and they're no longer human, they're not really who they are.
No, what I'm saying is
that just seems a pretty
what I'm saying is that it's a much more complex interface than that. Okay, because the behaviors that we enact as a result of signals our brain gives us, a lot of that comes from dopaminergic responses that have been hardwired in because of certain behaviors. Somebody who had brain damage and exhibited an addiction, there's going to be like they can recover from the damage of drinking alcohol all the time, but they're still going to have little changes in their brain, such as the dopaminergic response to alcohol will be strengthened in those neurons. So I reject your claim that anybody ever fully recovers from brain damage, because necessarily as a part of brain damage and recovering it, certain parts of your brain rewire. So that is always going to residually affect the way they subjectively experience the signals their brain sends them. So I don't think that...
Yeah, that's a pretty fine distinction. So what part of the soul, what part of the thing that's not in your brain can act, exist, or function independent of it? Any part? So let's say, I took a scrambled around my brain, can't be damaged. What properties does my soul have that are independent of my brain?
In the physical world, nothing that we...
What meaning does it have? What meaning does the soul have independent of the brain? What can it do? What is it like? Does it have a personality?
Okay. The only two capacities of the soul that I'm aware of are to experience and to choose. So this is going to get pretty technical, but what I personally believe, and I can't exactly demonstrate any of this, obviously, physically, but it has implications for... It has implications for why what you're saying doesn't demonstrate that it's not true. Okay, so what I believe about the soul and the way it interacts with the brain is that since we are made in the image of God, we are, like God, able to affect reality. And this is why free will is something unique to human beings. Because our souls experience, which is in a sense an interrupt in time, that's why you experience moment to moment, something that naturalism also can't account for at all. So you experience a moment in time, you're given the snapshot of it basically, and then you make a choice based on it. Okay, so those are the two capacities of the soul. You experience the blueprint that your brain interface has given you from reality, and then you make a choice to give back to the parts of your brain that control your impulses and everything like that.
But I can make a
computer program that seems to do that, yes.
No, it does do that. It will say, look at a few bits inside the computer, and based on what it finds there, it will make a decision through a process, and
sure, you can make an artificial. You can make an enemy in a video game that acts on artificial intelligence, and I'm talking about the distinction between that and a player.
Sure. But why is it different? What is the
fundamental difference between a human and an animal? Animals don't start nuclear wars. There are plenty of animals that could technically have the capacity to do much more than they do to go against their own nature.
Humans don't lick their own balls. I mean, so.
and that's kind of
I don't want to know about that.
Kind of an important point. Humans do insane things that don't make any sense. Okay, there are plenty of animals that are extremely intelligent. Octopodes, for instance, or octopi, depending on.
I think if you look at any human behavior, you can end up explaining it. And you can't always see a lack of knowledge. I don't think there's no explanation. There's always a cause and effect. I just think we don't always know.
There are oftentimes explanations that you cannot physically quantify in the mind. Like you can take two people, you can do an MRI scan of their brain, and you can see they're both perfectly normal, but this one just does things that are contrary to his own nature. He just does strange things.
Contrary to his own nature?
Yes.
Yeah,
humans constantly do things that are contrary to our own nature.
I disagree. I think you can only do things that are in keeping with your nature as an individual.
Okay. Suicide is not something that is commonly found in the animal kingdom.
That's not entirely true.
I mean, I would love to see you cite your sources.
A lot of animals starve themselves to death when they get to a certain age. So I've had a number of dogs as a child, and a lot of dogs have an instinct that when they get to be old enough, they will want to wander away from the family and go like find a place in the wood. They lie down, they stop eating, they don't nurture themselves.
That's a part of natural death. That's not suicide. Their body is coming to their body is coming to a point where they're breaking down. And
well, I mean, what other means of suicide do they have?
Perfectly healthy people who should be absolutely sane kill themselves.
Yeah, they do it because they're depressed and feel hopeless. They don't feel their life is worth living. That's a reason.
Some don't. Some people that you cannot find an explanation for why they kill themselves at all kill themselves. So people make choices that don't make sense, is what I'm saying. People
they don't make sense to you, they make sense to them.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they make sense to their subjective consciousness because their subjective consciousness has free will and is able to do things that don't make sense from a deterministic standpoint.
But I think
we've kind of come to an impasse in the argument here where we're not really making any headway.
Gotcha.
So
we are naysaying a bit.
Yeah, we can debate free will and determinism all night, like, till the cows come home. The problem on that is epistemology, and I'm not going to get through to you with anything that can't be proven through science and kind of physical reasoning. Like, what can we test? What can we know in the real world? I'm not going to get through to you with anything beyond that. That's probably true. I can get into an epistemic debate about why science and repetition is not the be all end all of knowledge, but we're getting really off track here about subjective versus objective morality. And I guess the point that I would like to drive home is that the basis of your view seems to be you can't make an objective claim from a subjective position. So morality being something that isn't necessarily quantifiable in a hard science, like, there it is. Every time you do this, you'll get this reaction. Every time you do this, you'll get this reaction. It's not quantifiable in a hard science that there is no objective basis for it. And my problem with that is that seems to be a self-refuting claim. It's like a solipsist claiming nothing exists outside his own mind because he can't prove that anything exists outside his own mind. Okay, you can't prove that anything exists outside your own mind, but that statement keeps to itself. Nobody out here who believes in the existence of objective things is going to really be convinced by that. Okay, so nobody who believes in the existence of morality as something that is universally binding upon all people, which is generally taken to be the understanding of morality, even if we don't know what is universally binding on all people.
That's a pretty challenging thing, though.
Most people are going to accept that morality is universally binding on all people.
Like there's a perfect movie playing somewhere. I don't know where it is. You can't watch it, but it's out there. Do I believe that? I don't know why I would.
And I'm saying that's a solipsist viewpoint, and I don't think that carries much weight. So I mean, it's a completely unattackable statement, just like solipsism is a completely unattackable worldview.
Well, I'd like to think that my views, my constructions of the way I think things work, are consistent within their own viewpoints.
Mm-hmm. And as I said before on a Facebook debate, I can't call solipsism intellectually dishonest. That's the one thing I can't call it. So I guess you've got me there, but I just don't think it carries much weight.
Yeah, I think in the end, a lot of it comes down, when I have these arguments, this is going to go off the philosophical track. I just find a lot of people don't enjoy my view of the universe. They don't like determinism because that means we're all some kind of robots and that takes away your ability to be you or something, which doesn't make sense to me, but that's the way they feel. They don't like subjective morality because they can't go, but now I can't point to this thing and say, absolutely, you have to obey because it's objective. Not that you ever really could, but, it makes people feel good to have that backing them up. Mm. It makes people feel good to have God and cosmic justice and cosmic truth and love and so forth, that their souls will go on beyond their death and have some kind of an afterlife that's meaningful to them. All these things are very pleasant thoughts. They're reassuring thoughts. They're safe thoughts. My worldview is...
I think your worldview is safer than mine.
Really? Because I look around and I see these things, and that's just what I observe about the way things operate and interact. And when I see the world and things that happen in the world, mm-hmm. almost all the time, it's reinforcing of these viewpoints. And so I tend to continue to build confidence in them. I don't find them that problematic, but I'm not a very stressful, worrying kind of guy. I'm pretty easygoing, happy-go-lucky. Like I said, my moral philosophy is a little Epicurean in that I'm like, you know what? The best way to live is to be at peace and have a relatively relaxed and pleasant life. on massive passion. I'm not one for horrible pain. Definitely not. Don't like that. I'm for kind of a nice even keel. Enjoy the finer pleasures, but don't go overboard. And I don't know, it works for me. Subjective morality does pretty good. And every single person I see around that claims, there's some people that get really on their high horse about it. They're like, you can't live without objective morality. You can't say what's right and wrong. You can't. I do it all the time. Nobody else has a superior, none of these people that have their moral objective lives. They're not necessarily more moral people. They don't do better in persuading others necessarily of their moral view.
For that, you obviously can't say there. I see your view, and I see why your worldview is nicely contained within itself, because it's solipsist in nature. And so I guess the only way that we could actually make any headway in this argument is if I could demonstrate to you that using valid epistemological principles, it is far more likely than not, which is usually the skeptic's criteria for believing something. It is far more likely than not that there does exist an objective being, which is beyond space, time, and matter, necessarily responsible for creating it, necessarily responsible for determining the natural laws, and if it determined the natural laws, then it likely determined the moral laws as well. So the only way that we can make headway in this debate is to have an argument about that, because so far I haven't demonstrated to you that naturalism is self-defeating. I'm happy to do that in a third debate, but that would be a different topic as to whether or not morality is subjective. It would carry weight retrospectively for this debate, but it would be its own debate. And I think in the future we should absolutely have a debate on that, because with you adhering to a naturalistic worldview and saying, prove me wrong, and me adhering to a dualist theological worldview and saying, prove me wrong, we're not going to make any headway here. We're simply not.
Not very far.
Yeah.
But, it's worth trying.
Yeah, absolutely. So to demonstrate that morality is objective and not subjective, you essentially have to demonstrate that there is a non-physical component to minds and that there is an original one responsible for them, which I'm happy to demonstrate to you later.
Sure, we can give that a try next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sig, I had a really fun time in debating you tonight in both parts of it, and I think that we kind of understand each other's worldviews pretty well. I think that we disagree on a lot of crucial areas, but that's always going to happen. That's why we're having debates.
But I respect your view,
and I respect yours as well. And until next time, I'm happy to get into the God debate with you later on, the flat out God debate, which is where this always leads.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. We'll do that.
It's a good one. All right, have a good night.